Hey everybody, welcome back to Uncle Pookie's Barbecue. I'm Uncle Pookie, and as you can see, I have about a 15-16 pound brisket. This is what is known as the whole packer brisket. It has the flat end and the point attached. And I'm just going to go through. I've had a lot of friends and family ask about doing, when I do a brisket, they've said they wanted to do it, but they've been scared because it's such a big piece of meat and they're not really sure what to do with everything. So I'm just going to go through my simple steps of making this like a home trim brisket. I'm not going to do competition cut or anything like that, but I'm going to take open the package up, get some of this hard fat out of the center between. This harder fat separates the flat from the point, and you'll see that it is easier to see when it's cooked down. There's a natural separation in there, but you normally get your slices from the flat here, and then you can either shred or pull, or if you're doing competition, you do burn ends with this point meat. And I mean, brisket's a really great piece of meat. It's kind of tough sometimes. You know, if you're not sure exactly what you're doing, if you just threw this on the smoker, it would be okay. But we're going to take a lot of this heavy fat off and trim it down to make it a little quicker cook. And like I always say, I'd rather do a little work on this end than have a whole bunch of cutting out and separating from fat and gristle and meat when it comes time to eat. So I'm just going to open up this package here, and we will show you here what we're talking about when it comes to the point and the flat areas. And brisket's funny because you get, say you order 3 briskets, and all 3 of them will be a little bit different. One of them will have a real thick flat, and the next one will have a smaller, thinner flat, but the point will be really big. And sometimes they have a lot of this hard fat you got to carve out, and sometimes it's very little trimming needed. So you know, there's not just one textbook way of doing this, or what you'll have to do when you encounter one. So we're just going to dig in here and kind of flip it around a little bit and see what we've got. So that hard fat right in there. All that's going to get softer as it cooks, but it's going to just add to your cook time, which brisket can take. Some folks I hear, you know, cutting a brisket or cooking a brisket for up to 20 hours. And we're going to cut that down to as short of a cook time as possible. I'd rather cook mine for 8 or 9 hours. There again, there's that hard fat. Now we're also going to trim off some of this top layer of fat over this flat end, and then sometimes you can kind of see there's a difference. This silver or gray, they call it silver skin. It will cook off, but really it's just a barrier between your seasonings and the meat itself. So I'm going to let this sit overnight with the seasoning and everything that I choose on it. And I'd rather have that seasoning penetrate as deep into the meat as possible. So I'm going to go through and show you how I kind of get my flexible little fillet knife here. I'm going to get that up under this silver skin and cut as much of that off as possible. But I'm just going to start kind of digging in here. I've already seen where some of this hard fat is separating, so I'm just going to kind of follow that a little bit and cut in there. I don't want to cut out a lot of this meat. I know a lot of folks will use any scraps here and grind their own hamburger meat and whatnot, and that's fine for that. That's no problem. But I'm going to try to save as much of this as possible since we are feeding family with it. Again, I don't want to waste a whole lot of this meat. And again, it's, you know, per pound, brisket's not that expensive, but of course you'll see how much we cut off of it. You're paying a whole lot of money, you know, 50, 60, 70 bucks sometimes for a choice, and sometimes prime prices get down low enough where you can get prime for $3 or $4 a pound, but it's a whole lot of waste poundage that you'll end up cutting off this thing that you're paying for on the front end. So again, I'd rather do a little work now than later, but it is a little more expensive piece of meat to cook, so I don't want to waste a whole lot of it there. Like I said, we're just going to go through here and kind of cut out so I can see more of the separation between the point and the flat. I'm going to end up trimming a lot of that down, but just as I'm going along here. And you'll see too when you open the package, sometimes there's some of this meat on the edge that turns gray. That cryovac will have a little bit of a leak in it, maybe let a little air in. It's not that meat gets bad, but as it gets oxidized, I'd rather just go ahead and cut it off. Now this one was sealed up really well. I don't really see, there's a little bit of gray meat up in here that I'm going to trim down, but right now it's really not looking too bad. Like I said, you can see some of that hard fat that's separating the two. We'll come through here a little bit and see if we can trim and kind of get our line of where the fat stops and the meat starts. Again, I'm just going to kind of go along and find any scrap, any gray meat, any fat along the edge, and go ahead and get rid of it. Let me spin this around and see. Again, you can kind of tell where that separation is. I want to kind of make that a little more clear before I start digging in 100% on it. Again, there's some more of that hard fat. That's going to go away here in a little bit. There's another big debate too on how much fat you leave on the bottom part of your brisket. And to me, it depends on what kind of cooker you're using. Of course, I'm going to be cooking this on my drum, my Uncle Pookie smoker, and the heat is coming from below. So I do want to leave a little layer of fat, but I don't like this hard fat. I like this softer fat because it's going to melt away. That's what's going to render nicely as our cook goes through. The harder fat, it will get soft and it will be easy to separate when it's cooked. But again, it's just something that's going to take more time to get. It's insulating the meat, which is good, but it's also making that cook time longer and longer. And I want to make this a little bit shorter of a cook, so I'm going to trim and just leave a light layer of fat on the bottom side of this. Again, it'll insulate any flare-ups as the fire catches the wood, the smoking wood on, or anything like that. It'll insulate the meat from that hot fire. But again, the more work I can do on this end of it means everything's a lot easier when it's time to eat. So again, they're not a thick layer there. There's a good little bit of gray meat right in here. I'm going to go ahead. Another thing I like to do, especially when I'm cooking a brisket whole like this for family, I kind of like to streamline it. When I'm done trimming this thing, there's going to be this thicker end because we got 2 layers of meat here. But I want it to be as flat as possible, as even as possible. I don't want this huge hump sitting so far up. Again, you've got a thicker mass here. It's going to take longer for all this meat to cook than it will down here. So we're just going to kind of, I'll flip it 3 or 4 times. It's a work in progress. It's not something I just go through and wham, bam, bam, and it's all trimmed up, ready to go. Kind of have to study each brisket as you go through and see as you're cutting what can be trimmed down a little further, what we want to save. You know, all that kind of comes as you're trimming along. There is no, this is the way you trim brisket 1, 2, 3, 4 steps here. It's always what the brisket gives you, kind of a thing. This end of the point and flat has a whole lot of fat in it. That was what I was looking at on the outside. A lot of fat and a lot of gray meat. I just barely got into some of the red meat, so I'm going to get into that a little bit. And kind of, again, it'll show me that difference in the layering and to see where my separation is. I don't know how well you'll be able to see that, but that's what we're talking about when I cut into that. It's really good marbling in the point end, which is good, but I'm going to try to cut all this harder fat out, and then I'm going to take some of this off right here and just see where I'm at. See the difference between the fat and the meat, and see what it's telling me, where I need to trim more, where I trim less, what I need to leave alone. So we're just going to come through that way a little bit. Let's see what we got on this end. Not a whole lot of gray meat in that. That was sealed off really well, and you can tell where this flat is thicker on this end than this end. So you're going to have a little bit of this is going to end up being drier. just because it's so thin. You're going to be waiting for all this other thicker mass to come up to temp and to get tender. So again, I kind of go back and forth. Some people start on one end and work their way down. I just kind of see as I'm trimming along what I need to hit next. And this is where I was talking about that silver skin earlier. Sometimes you can take your knife blade and just work your way underneath it. I'll get it started and get a little strap to pull on, and then I'll go through and just kind of keep that knife blade just underneath that silver skin. I don't want to cut off too much of this meat, but again, I want no barrier between the meat and the seasoning. And as much of this silver skin you can get out of there, the better off you'll be. Again, it will cook off. You leave a little bit on there. It's not like gristle that you'll find, if you're getting a good piece of beef jerky and all of a sudden you can't chew through some of it. It's nothing like that. It does cook away, but again, it's just a block or a wall, so to speak, between your meat and your seasoning. And I want that seasoning to sit on this meat and penetrate this top layer of meat as deep as it can. And even if it's sitting in the refrigerator for 12 hours, I don't want it to be bound up by this silver skin. So as much as I can get through there and get underneath it, the better it's going to be in the long run, the end result here. And there's a little bit of fat on the top here. Again, that would render as it cooks, but why not go ahead and cut it out and like I said, get that seasoning down into that meat. The salt in my seasonings will open up these pores of this meat and just open it up to as much flavor, and then too in the cooking process let as much smoke as possible get to it, and that's what we ultimately want. They say fat is flavor, and that is true to a certain degree, but it's also blocking my other flavors that I want this brisket to have. So, and again, this is just a home cook. It's not a competition or anything, so it's not going to be absolutely perfect. I'm not going to be able to get every little bit of fat and silver skin off of this. That's another trick too. If you get your hand underneath there, that meat is so flexible. A lot of times you can raise it up in spots to get your knife blade underneath it and just start carving away. That'll help to get under that silver skin, whereas you're just skimming along the top, you're not really digging in there and getting that silver skin off. So again, you kind of have to figure out what works best for you, how you can get underneath there and get all that cut out. And like I said, that's about as deep as I want to go. If I can't get every little piece of this silver skin off that way, I'm going to leave it, because I don't want to just continue to carve away and cut off all this meat when I've spent 50 or 60 bucks on this brisket. I don't want to just put it all in the discard or make it all grind. And this here is not going to be any good for grinding for burger meat anyway. If I was saving this, I'd save these pieces like this with the fat on it and the meat, but the silver skin portions, that's no good. That's a scrap pile right there. So that's looking pretty good right there. I'm going to come through and get a little bit more on this end. This thinner end is going to be dry anyway as it's cooking. It's going to get done before some of these thicker ends, so a lot of cooks will just go ahead and cut this off. And again, if I was saving this to grind, I probably would save all that too, but this time I'm not, and I've got so much saved up right now in the freezer. I'm trying to figure out when I'm going to have time to grind it up. So again, I'm going to go ahead and just cook this as a whole and save as much of this meat on there as possible, even if it turns out a little dry. Heck, some people may like dry meat, I don't know. But we're going to go through here. Get this last little bit and then flip it over and see what else we got. Again, I'm going to leave some of this together. I'm not trying to make a total separation, but I do want to thin this end down a little bit and see what we're dealing with. I try to keep it as thin as possible to shorten up our cook time. And that's my ultimate goal right now, is getting my cook time down to about 8 hours. We've got a family event tomorrow. I'm going to cook this up for that, and I don't want to be sitting around at the house waiting for brisket to get done. It's easy to be intimidated if you're not used to doing this by looking at this big piece of meat. And that's one reason why I go back and forth. I'll flip it over and do a little bit here and there, and then I'll go back to the other side. I just kind of get a lay of the land, see how the meat is laying when I'm trying to get it as flat as possible. I don't want to just gouge on one end a whole bunch and then come to find out I've took too much out of one section. So I'm just going to do a little bit here and then flip it over and do a little bit more and flip it back and see. Again, I'm going to cut into some of this hard fat here. I just don't want to completely separate the two muscle groups. I'm going to separate it out some so I can get that hard decal fat out of it, but not all the way. I don't want to cook two separate pieces of meat. Turn this back around here. Trying to be really careful. I don't like cutting towards myself. There we go. Kind of getting it separated here a little bit. And you'll see definitely as you start to get down, you'll be cutting along and you'll run into meat. And you know, okay, I don't need to go any further. Well, you're not hurting anything if you jab into that meat a little bit. It's not going to ruin anything. It's not going to make the meat dry out or anything like that. You're just working it to see where you need to stop. Again, you do a lot of work like this even when you're doing a pork butt. You know, you've got such a big mass of meat. It's one primary hunk of meat, whereas this is two separate muscles. They go in two totally different directions. You can kind of see the muscle fibers, the grain of this meat is running north-south the way we are right now, but then this point meat on the other side is more going east-west. It's going this way. So it does matter what you're doing as far as that goes, but it's again, you take a little here, you take a little there, you see what direction you need to go next. Sometimes you may see, oh, I went a little too far on that grab or that cut. Well, that's okay. You're cooking for families. If you're like me, you're a whole lot more critical of your work than anybody else is. So it's not going to hurt anything. You just don't want to take big chunks out and then find out you cut into some good meat, and that's, how many dollars a pound. You want to start thinking about that. You want to just get as much of this harder fat out of it without cutting out too much meat. So yeah, we're kind of getting to that point. Now in this case, this is still a little bit frozen down inside, so it's kind of good. It makes it a little easier to cut, or to deal with. It's not getting thawed out, and sometimes you get meat that's, as it's thawing, it gets a little slippery, but right now it's doing pretty good. Now this is what I was talking about. This is a little bit more level than it was before. And this meat right here is not gray, but you can tell a difference in the fibers. I don't know if you can get a close look at that. This is down inside, and this outside is just starting to get a little bit of air to it, starting to get a little gray. So I'm going to go ahead and trim that down. And again, I kind of want to make a smooth surface for that smoke to roll over as smooth as possible. And that's a lot better than it was when we started. We had this big hump on this end. It's still a little thick over here, but I think too it's still froze in this end. So as it thaws out, it's going to level out a little bit more. So I think we're in good shape. Now, a lot of guys will tell you need to cut a notch so you'll know what direction to cut your slices when you're slicing this up. It's pretty obvious to me. A lot of times I won't cut that because I'll know the point is the end of all of these muscle fibers. So I'll just start cutting away like this. If you need a reminder, there's nothing wrong with just cutting a flat edge on this end. Or if your muscle fibers go more this way, you can cut a notch this way. Just something to remind yourself, because you want these slices to be cut perpendicular to the grain pattern. So if the grain is going this way, I'm going to cut it this way. That's going to make your most tender slices. And then again with the point here, probably going to cube it up anyway after it's cooked. May end up just pulling it to have like a, instead of pulled pork, having pulled beef, barbecue sandwiches, something like that. You can always do that. But we'll see how the cook goes. Anyway, I just wanted to do this quick video. Like I said, I've got some friends and some family that enjoy eating brisket and want to cook it, but they're scared when they see this big 15 to 20 pound piece of meat and it's got so much on it, you don't really know what to do with it. This is just a simple, quick video of how I like to trim down a brisket for a home meal, a home cooked situation, feeding friends and family. And I hope this helps you out here. If you have any questions or anything I can help with, feel free to message me on Facebook. Subscribe and like the videos on YouTube. Check me out on Instagram and Twitter. Appreciate all the support and everything. And we will check y'all the next time. Thank you very much.